Why chemical engineering out of curiosity? What was the draw for you that took you down that particular lane?
When you think about like making an impact on what you want to do, I think many forms of engineering, you can use them in a variety of ways. Right now, though, if I think about chemical engineering, there's a lot of different ways you can make, the climate technology impact. And so I would say is a great one to go into, from bioplastics and thinking about new ways of plastics that are going to break down. If you want to think about the materials, the nanoparticles, you want to think about batteries, electrochemical processes, wastewater, there's a wide variety of things you can do with that. So that would be why I encourage people now to kind of take a look at it.
Welcome to the Inner Genius Podcast with Joe Patch IV.
I want to welcome everyone to another episode of the Inner Genius Podcast. I'm very excited to have my guest today, Pamela Lynch, with us. Pamela is an industry insider, great insights on the energy space, a chemical engineer. She's working on some cool stuff. We're not going to get into it today, but you can find her on LinkedIn, check her out. But I'm super excited to have you on today, Pamela. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks, Joe. I'm so glad to be here.
Wonderful. Well, let's take it kind of from the top. Let's get a little bit of background about yourself, kind of help the audience know a little bit who you are. And I mentioned obviously chemical engineering, but kind of how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah. I started my career at GE Plastics, did the operations management leadership program, moved around quite a bit. I had grown up in Maine, and that program moved me around to 3-4 different sites around the Midwest. So got some great experience in plastics plants, chemical plants, chloralkali, all kinds of different things. And then from there, I got recruited to work for a battery company. So went to work for a battery startup company and did a variety of things. But maybe a memorable thing to note was worked on batteries for Formula One race cars, and got to meet some pretty awesome people and had some customers with big name customers come on in and kind of work with them as we were putting those batteries together in Massachusetts. So that was pretty awesome. Also worked on wind turbines. I've worked on some different materials, worked on composites, again, for wind turbine blades and for lightweight composite parts for electric vehicles, electric buses. Most recently been working on wastewater, removing contaminants of water. So water is kind of this newer sustainability piece of that puzzle, right? And how do we remove PFAS, forever chemicals, and destroy them forever? So, the main man-made materials that are in our water contaminating, just how do we get those out and make sure that we're leaving the world in a more sustainable place than it is now? So,
absolutely.
Yeah, worked on engineering, supply chain, quality, variety of things, growing teams and launching products.
That's awesome. One of the things that just comes to my mind, my mind's kind of blowing up right now. I got lots of questions, but let me maybe just ask this one question real quick. I'm thinking of people that, maybe earlier or getting into their career. Why chemical engineering out of curiosity? What was the draw for you that took you down that particular lane?
Yeah, so I had gone to math camp and I had gone to engineering camp. So I learned about a lot of different ones, but I went to chemical engineering because I heard it was the toughest major. And there were some things that kind of drew me into that. So, when you think about like making an impact on what you want to do, I think many forms of engineering, you can use them in a variety of ways. Right now, though, if I think about chemical engineering, there's a lot of different ways you can make the climate technology impact. And so I would say that is a great one to go into. Again, if you want to do anything from, bioplastics and thinking about new ways of plastics that are going to break down. If you want to think about the materials, the nanoparticles, you want to think about batteries, electrochemical processes, wastewater, there's a wide variety of things you can do with that. So that would be why I encourage people now to kind of take a look at it. Many of the young people I've talked to have wanted to have that impact piece. So they're going to school thinking about an impact piece, not just I'm going to school and then I'm going to go to get a job. They've woven in that piece in what they're thinking about, which is, I think, more than what I was thinking about when I went to school.
I love how you tie that together. That's really interesting how I think you're right. And I didn't see that until I would say fairly recently, the last 5 years, how the chemical engineering really ties into, you talk about nanoparticles, you talk about materials, you talk about the impact within carbon reduction and within the energy space. You mentioned waters, plastics. It's so real. It's so very real. And so I think I love how you called that out. because there is such an integration there. I think a lot of times when people think engineering, they think the basics, the electrical, mechanical, civil. My father's a civil engineer, so I grew up, just understanding obviously what that was. And you kind of stay in that lane. Chemical was not something I was really exposed to, but I love the fact that and I would agree with you 100%. There's a lot that can be done in the chemical engineering space as it ties to, the future of the country, future of our society, quite frankly, in some very interesting ways, as you've mentioned. So let's talk a little bit about the batteries. What's your thought on kind of the state of lithium ion batteries today? I know you mentioned with the Formula One cars, which did you get around the racetrack? Did you get to see these things?
I did. I got to sit in the pit of a Formula One race when the team of engineers are watching all the screens, radioing in to the drivers, and the drivers are sometimes saying, I'm going to do that, and sometimes they're like, nope, I'm just going to speed ahead. And part of it is the kinetic energy recovery. So they need to be braking to charging the batteries, and then they're going to hit a boost button, which is going to accelerate them. But sometimes the drivers are going to take the input from the engineers, and sometimes they're just going to drive. And it was pretty wild to actually be in there, experiencing that firsthand of like, these are our customers, and this is, actually seeing it, in the field.
I love how you say that, in the field, because that's it. I mean, there you are. It's two things. It's a technology, and I would imagine, is it working as we've designed, and are there iterations to improve the design, right? How do we make it better?
Yeah.
So I can see on one side a very engineering focus. I can see on the other side the operational, the back and forth. I agree. I don't agree. This real-time transfer of information, gut sense of a driver driving, the quantitative analysis of a good engineer saying, look, last lap, I think we can do this to make a better lap. I mean, and all this is in real time. I can't imagine how many calories are being burned just going through an exercise like this. It's got to be exhausting, I would imagine, by the time it's over.
Yeah, I mean, but and it's exhilarating, right? I mean, that's kind of the rush that we're all feeling in there too. Yeah.
That's amazing. And they're just super. Are they like the fastest things you've ever seen on four wheels, these things?
Yeah, really? Absolutely.
Yeah. I can't imagine. So piggybacking back real quick, I kind of went off on a tangent because I love the story. Wish I was there. What do you think about with the lithium ion batteries today as a whole? I mean, we can, obviously look in the EV market. We look in the power space too. We look at, our company supported a number of BESS projects on the project development side and on the execution side, as you say, in the field, building these things out. What's your thought on that kind of in general? Because it's something I'm really curious about.
Yeah, I would say that some of the technologies and materials have come a long way from when I was working on them earlier in my career, which was a while ago, right? 10 plus years ago. Yeah, I would say we're seeing advances. We're seeing batteries for electric vehicles last longer. We're seeing, more alternatives and different materials where the cycles the batteries can hold up to is just longer. You hear that from people in the battery industry. And I was catching up with someone very recently, and he was kind of saying that, right? It's just the materials are much better than they used to be. But you can also sense it from the electric vehicle side of much more adoption of people. Yeah, advances in materials, advances in the process, advances in repeatability. So you can see it from the materials side, from the materials and scientist side, and then you can see it in just more advancements throughout the U.S. and more people adopting electric vehicles and the cycle life of those batteries and batteries getting longer range.
Okay. Do you think it continues? I'm just kind of curious in general. I mean, the adoption of the electric vehicles, I think it continues to climb over the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think it will. I think there's still areas that we need to get over it, and there's probably other areas of mobility that we need to get through as well. So if you think about if there's more electric buses and more people are taking public transportation, if you think about that, like there are additional ways to reduce the transport carbon footprint. So I think that everyone's going to go buy an electric car, and that we're going to have charging stations everywhere. We're going to get more adoption.
Right.
But I don't know that we're ever going to get there, that everyone's going to have one.
That's an interesting perspective, Pam. I hadn't thought about that, right? I mean, you look at the buses, and I live in an area where there's not a lot of mass transportation. So as opposed to, like Boston and, I could think of other cities where there certainly is a lot more. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Do you think it ever gets to the point? Probably not, right? Where you have, gas stations on most corners. Do you think, I mean, there needs to be more charging stations, and certainly there's more, I think of the Walmarts they've adopted, and they have charging stations for Tesla and things like that. And I think there's more people that will come into play. But do you think that the infrastructure has to grow to a kind of a certain point, but it'll never reach what it is on gas?
It certainly has to grow to a certain point.
Hmm.
A little bit of like diversification of energy and power
Sure.
sources, right?
Right.
Do I think that everything should go on wind, or do I think everyone should be on natural gas? There seems to be, you need some level of diversification.
Yep.
And so I think if you had asked me, 10 years ago, would everyone be driving an electric car? I would have said yes. And I think now I would say,
Yeah.
no, I think there's going to be a lot of need for it. I think we need to reduce transport carbon footprint, but I don't think
Sure.
every single person's going to have one.
Right, right. No, I would agree, and I did certainly appreciate your comment on the diversity of mix. That's something I maybe, again, as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate the fact that you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's going to be several things that solve the problem, and maybe it's better that way because you diversify your risk a little bit too inherently in that process,
Yeah.
and you still give the market a chance to do what it does, and people flexibility to kind of choose what works well for them. Because some people, quite frankly, are handicapped when it comes to certain options. They just
Right.
don't have it. Whether they want it or not is somewhat irrelevant from the perspective of they just can't get it. And it's like, well, but I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. And in that case, it's like, okay, I think if you're doing your best, most times we'll get to the finish line,
Right.
which is a good thing. Any thoughts on hydrogen? It just popped in my head. I don't know. Any thoughts on where we're going with hydrogen? What your take is there?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe too soon to comment. I don't know. I mean, I see a lot of the exciting new startups, and I'm excited to
Right.
see them advance, but I don't know that I've figured out kind of how far that's going to go yet. I think there's certainly opportunity, right? But I haven't studied
Yeah.
that market enough.
Well, no, that's okay. I just wanted to check it out. I mean, admittedly, right? It's still in its infancy. I think certainly green
Yeah.
hydrogen, I think has a long ways to go. There's, as you said, there's some really promising, and we've worked with some startups that I think have some great ideas, but they've got to get proven at scale. And I think that market adoption is very important as well. And you could probably speak better to it than me, but just because you have a technology that works doesn't mean it gets adopted for a whole
That's right.
host of reasons, some good, some bad, and some are make sense, some quite frankly don't make sense. Like, wow, this is a great idea. I can't believe this didn't get legs and run, but it didn't. But yeah, no, I think there's a long ways to go on that. But I would throw out there too, when you see these new markets, that could be an exciting option too for someone younger in their career as well, because there's not anybody around that's like, hey, I've done 15 green hydrogen projects. Let me tell you how the cow ate the cabbage, because it's like no
Right.
one's done that. So I think there are opportunities certainly in hydrogen, and I think your comment earlier with chemical engineering, there's ways to make impact certainly in startups and in new technologies where if you get into it and you stay in it for a little while, I think you can be surprised how much and how much you have to give back in a short period of time, which is not the case with every industry, as we know. Some been around a while, and if you haven't been in it a long time, you don't really know all there is to know. So that's a great point. What's your thoughts, as far as carbon reduction, carbon capture, that kind of a thing? What are the things that what are your thoughts? I mean, how do we solve that problem? What's the 1, 2, 3 plan of Pamela on how to make it better? And you can go anywhere you want with this one.
See, how do we make that better? I mean, how do we make that more accessible? How do we make it so anyone can figure out what their carbon footprint is, and maybe so you need to take individual steps. You need to take companies, big companies, big users need to take big steps.
Right.
But I think it needs to be approached from different levels, because
Okay.
if we just think about carbon capture and we just think about the companies that are able to, have the carbon credits and some of that, I think we need a multi-prong approach to actually make some difference there. So there's a lot of technologies, but
Hmm.
how do we get the adoption, and how do we get the greater understanding and awareness
Right.
around is a big piece, I think.
It's interesting because I think what maybe you're saying too is that you can't leave it in the hands of kind of the big companies, that are either in a position to get the carbon credits and have the offsets or let's say are creating a significant amount of the problem.
Yeah.
You think it could all, I mean, that's part of the equation, but also part of it is even individual responsibility as a way also. Um,
Yeah, I do
you
think so.
do. I had we had a gentleman on the show recently who has a startup. They're looking at batteries inside the home, and they have a certain sort of market sector, price point, et cetera. And one of the things that he was opining on pretty strong was conservation. How does one reduce? And in their case, if you can reduce some power, sell some back to the grid, there is an interesting kind of monetary exchange that can happen on one hand. But even if his point was if you had a ton of people reduced by a very, very small percentage, it has a bigger impact than some of the, let's say, call it the bigs or the major companies putting incentives in place upon themselves that would create massive reductions. And that was kind of the way they were looking to sort of tackle the problem as a company.
Yeah, I think about if you think about waste and
Uh-huh.
just kind of the waste that goes to landfills and then divide that
Okay.
up average per person just based on population. I've read
Hmm.
some things how, Americans we're not reducing our waste, right? So there are efforts being taken, but in general, if you just divide it out, we're not making a big enough impact. But
Oh,
you think about
interesting.
in some other countries, they're actually taking an approach around educating and
Mm.
I think back like conserving water. I remember staying at a great sustainable hotel in Germany because I
Okay.
was working for a sustainable company and they put us
Uh,
up in this great hotel and it literally was going to turn the water off on you because you took, too long of a shower. So think like
really?
when you're camping, this is actually a hotel. And so, I'm like, maybe this is a little too green for me, right? A little too conservation focused. But I think there's a balance there, right? There's something around Americans and waste, and I am a proud American, but I mean, I think there's an education piece around this, and I think when it comes to carbon and carbon footprint, I mean, big companies are making steps, but we all need to understand the problem, and that will help drive big companies do the right thing. But then we can
Yeah.
all take small steps for doing the right thing as well. And that doesn't mean everyone needs to go buy a Tesla, but people can do it in different ways, right?
Yeah, I know. I love your answer. No, I think you're absolutely right. And that's an interesting point. I heard that somewhere too. Maybe it was in a kind of a green hydrogen conversation I was having about how you look at waste streams and we have the ability to separate, you get the recycle and you get the cardboard and this, that, and the other. But their comment really caught me off guard. Despite the fact that these programs have been set up and you get the different colored trash cans and all these things, they didn't really see massive net benefit at the handling facilities, and then therefore you go to the landfills, and so to your point, that really kind of surprised me. I guess I thought the needle would have moved, okay, materially, but what they were arguing was it really hasn't moved materially, and
Right.
maybe that's to your point. Maybe people don't know that or understand it, so you're falsely assuming, hey, I'm doing everything. I mean, I got a garbage truck that just went by the office here so I could hear them outside, so so part of it is like we're doing the right thing, but no, you're not. I mean, it's not working exactly like it was designed. So that's an interesting point that you make, and that education, I think, could help reframe some of that.
Yeah.
Do you think part of it too, just in the American way of life? I'm just curious. I mean, do you think some of it is the waste stream and some of what we're dealing with comes to either consumerism or packaging? We could talk about plastics, we could talk about
Yeah.
cardboard, but I see that I've often wondered, and I think you're in a better position to actually answer this question certainly than myself, but I've often wondered when you look at the consumption rate of a lot of Americans of stuff and things and the plastic bottles and even the plastic bottles that come wrapped in plastic, and
Right. Right.
it's almost like, let's get down to the white meat. You got to strip it of everything to get to what you want. And I've often wondered, is that part of the challenge too? Is there work to be done there that could help in a massive way? And I don't even know where to begin to solve that one, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, if that's part of the contributor.
Yeah, and I got in an interesting conversation recently around, bioplastics or, things that are going to biodegrade, and then the integrity of that plastic. So are people going to use it, but it doesn't have the strength because it's going to degrade. So there's certain applications You may not want degrading plastic because of other things, right? So
Good point.
those,
Good point.
so these protect, the protective shield of the plastic if it's degrading. So, but I do think, I mean, the bioengineering of plastics that deliberately break down or have a way to break down. So packaging does break down in the future and doesn't stay forever is
Yeah.
going to be an area that needs focus and needs work. Because packaging, if you can use reusable packaging, I would say that is many ways that people are, on their ESG or their waste reduction. They are doing that. That's the first go-to is, can we have the reusable packaging? Great. But then what are we going to do further? And I think there's opportunity there. So, we need the technology around it. We need to test it. We need to figure it out. But certainly in the plastics realm, it'll be very interesting.
So that's interesting. I mean, so you think there's a lot of work to be done there. I mean, this is a space that is ripe for, bright minds, a lot of work to be had, and, a space we're going to be busy at for a while. That's really interesting to me. Yeah. What do you, how do you define a bioplastic? Maybe help me understand. What would that be?
Like, is it something with organisms? Is it something with algae? Is it something with more, I'll say more organic, or something that occurs naturally in the world, and then you can force that to speed it up? So you're basically combining to make something that is going to be more structurally stable, but it isn't completely like a person-made plastic or forever chemical. So
I see.
That would be how I would describe it. Not an expert in it, but that's kind of what I'm about. Yeah.
Okay. No, I know that's good, because my knowledge of plastics is pretty much zero. So I see it, water bottle. I'm like, God, this is great. It's not spilling on me while I'm drinking it. We're good.
But so think about petroleum feedstocks, right? A lot of plastics right now is petroleum feedstock. So how do you go to something different and use something more natural, and then think about the life cycle of it?
And you think that's a whole market opportunity unto itself?
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. Interesting.
It's a huge market opportunity. Yeah. Yep.
Huge market. Let's talk a little bit about water. Just what are your thoughts on water? I mean, I know without getting too much into what you're doing now, but like, what as part of that conservation piece, it's not something I'm able to talk about very often. So I'm really curious on what your thoughts are. I mean, obviously, having good, clean, sustainable, obviously drinking water. I mean, it's kind of the foundation of life. Without it, we're kind of in a tough spot.
Yeah, you think of like equitable access to clean water. Do we believe that everyone should have access to clean water? Well, I think many of us would say, yes, everyone should have the opportunity to have that. So if you think about PFAS, forever chemicals, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, that is in a lot of water. So per and polyfluoroalkyl substances are in a lot of water. And they've recently come out with drinking water guidance to say you need to test the water in the United States. You need to test the water, and you can't have PFAS, forever chemicals in the water above like 4 parts per trillion. And so when you think about this, it actually says we're doing the right thing. We're taking the right steps. Some places are saying this is too costly. Some places don't test the water right now. They don't test. They might not have a problem. It's a very interesting time around water. But then also, if you think about even wastewater, are there things you can do to go kind of from the plastics or from the large companies that are manufacturing these forever chemicals? And what can you do to make sure that you're remediating, destroying, whatever you can do at that phase, so this water isn't actually getting in the system, in the wastewater treatment system, then getting into other water systems and contaminating people's drinking water. So this is another big area that I think a lot more light has been shown on this, around that these forever chemicals are cancer causing. They've had more longitudinal studies on it, and now we're starting to understand this. This is potentially the next big problem if we don't start to get our arms around it. And it's a global problem. It's not just here.
But, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And, Pamela, when you talk about forever chemicals, just to help kind of everybody understand, obviously me included, are those chemicals that are obviously in the plastic, and they're there because it's like anything else. They work well, they're structurally good, they fit the molding process, great for manufacturing. I mean, is that part of it? They're just part of the ingredient list that
Yeah.
we put out a bottle or a piece of plastic and it works well. And now the question is, well, we got to kind of redo it because this is toxic. Is that, I'm kind of curious. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, 12,000 to 15,000. So long chain, hard to break down plastic compounds that are identified. And it's the
You said 12 to
really good chemical
15,000?
resistant. Yeah, so it's
Are you
actually
serious?
it's a large category. Yes.
Oh my gosh. I thought
Yeah.
I thought it was like 3 or 4, honestly. Like there's just a couple that if we can move them out
No,
of the supply chain,
yeah.
we're good. 12 to 15,000. Okay. I'm sorry. Please continue that.
Yeah. So it's
No
a
idea.
large list. But it's the great properties of chemical resistant, water resistant,
Okay.
Teflon, think Teflon, right?
Teflon. Yep.
When you have
Yep.
your great rain jacket or outerwear, I mean, oftentimes if it has the really good properties, it has PFAS forever chemicals in it. Um,
Interesting.
so there, and this is, but it's in pipe lining, it's in tank lining of different manufacturing processes, it's in batteries, there's a lot of different things. And I think for
Wow.
so long we didn't know that, although this might be intuitive, so maybe we did know. These properties that make it so great are the same properties of why it doesn't break down. And so when you get them in your body, it doesn't break down, and then it bioaccumulates, and then it can cause cancer and impact reproductive health, impact women and children and growing children. It can impact, I mean, people who are in the military or firefighters who have been around firefighting foam. There are different things like that where suddenly you could say, okay, we had a whole group that had this event. We followed them. They all got cancer at the same time. Okay. Now we can tie it back to this specific exposure or this specific firefighting foam. They did firefighting foam training over and over again. So
Right.
it takes
Yeah.
years sometimes to follow these studies and really tie it back. But yeah, now we're much more aware of this.
Would you say at this point in time, Pamela, like, the evidence is there. It's clear. I mean, you can't kind of debate the fact that either it doesn't exist or it's not harmful. I mean, would you take the position that, look, this is real, it's harmful, we got to deal with it?
I would say so. I mean, it's more
Yeah.
clear now than ever before. And I would say
Okay.
that the EPA has started to take more regulation or changing laws. That tells me that the EPA and other government agencies are starting to say this is a problem. We need to take action.
Right.
And I would say in the past, large companies did not. Large companies had all kinds of reasons why someone might, have a health issue. And I think more than ever now, we can say it is tied to PFAS.
Sure. Well, I think part of it too, it's never easy to admit. We all make mistakes, sometimes we're wrong. It's not always, I don't know that it ever gets any easier to admit it, but I think if people are doing their best and you make a mistake and it's like, yeah, this is, not good. We probably need to re-engineer to figure out another way to do this, the right thing for the right reason. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, it goes a long ways, but yeah, it sounds like there's a ton of work to be done on that front. That it's pervasive and it's not good. And there's lots of, sounds like, different industries that need to tackle this particular issue. So then, there again, as you mentioned, what another great opportunity for someone with chemical engineering background to get involved to help solve.
Yeah.
I mean, let's call it what it is. These are big problems. These are massive problems that have huge impact on people's lives, and this is a big deal. Yeah.
And it needs the collaboration from everyone, right? It needs the diverse viewpoints. It needs, how do we do this together to actually move some things forward? It's not going to be solved by one or two companies. It's much larger than that.
I would agree. No, I think so. Okay, what are the things? Let's switch gears a little bit. I'm kind of, we've talked a lot about some technology and work. So we can go one of two ways with this next question. So however you want to answer it. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I like to talk to, about executives is we can go two ways. We can kind of talk about what's it like, to have a day in the life of Pamela. Because I think it's interesting. how executives kind of map out their day, or if there's something that's a part of your day that's just very non-negotiable that you do that helps center the day or focus the day. I've heard all kinds of cool stories on both sides, but maybe that's something that you want to delve into. I think that people are always curious. When you talk to folks that are high performers and have achieved a lot and are really doing something, we'll call it impactful within their space. I think people are always curious to, well, what's the formula, or what are the building blocks on how they use the day, or how they use their time, or how do they use their activities that allow them to continue to kind of stay a step ahead. And so that's kind of the question. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so what comes to mind is my daughter recently said to me, Mama, you have 40% energy and I have 500% energy, right? And so like she's like all this energy, and I'm like clearly wasn't bringing the energy that moment.
Yeah.
And it's a good reminder of like, what do we all do to recharge our own batteries? What do we
Right.
do to be able to be at that best level? How do we bring the energy when we need to? How do we not get drained? I mean, we all have things we have to do that we don't want to do, but
Sure.
how do you kind of go through and do all of those things?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, one of the things I did start doing a couple of years ago is working out at 5 a.m. So like, I never thought I would be one of the get up and work out at 5 a.m. people, but I had to do it because I had no time. So I'm not saying that works for everyone, but
Sure.
that is one of those things, right? Whenever you have the time, you have to take the time, and you have to make sure you do that.
Yeah.
I think there's other things. I mean, I'm big on making lists and knowing, kind of mapping out my day, mapping out my time, and then
Mhm.
kind of allocating certain things near each other, but also trying to build in the space. And some days you try to, but you still have back-to-back meetings. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's flawed, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's figuring that out. But yeah, taking time with family, taking time with friends,
Mhm.
and just making sure that we're all people, and we, you know, you can get really caught up in all the meetings and all the work, and that is so important. Um, you need to have a regular rhythm to those meetings that you have to do, the
Right.
business type meetings, but you also need to have things that you enjoy doing, and you have to
Yes.
build those into your schedule. And if you don't prioritize those, I would say people around you are going to know that you're not enjoying it, and that doesn't
Mhm.
help anyone, right? I mean, part of it is
Yes.
being a leader and showing up for the people on your team, and
Right.
especially in startups, leading through times of uncertainty. I mean, if you're not getting energy and kind of moving things forward, when things get hard, they'll feel that, and they won't feel that positive energy, and then it gets harder, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really important to figure out how to lead and be resilient, and yeah, just keep going one step ahead. Someone I talked to was mentioned the sailing analogy, right? You have to keep going in one direction. You might be here and then tacking and going that way. You might be tacking and
Yeah.
going that way, but you need to be going forward. You
That's
don't
right.
ever want to be spun around and going backward, because that can definitely go in a downward spiral.
Yeah. Yes. 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 No, I love your advice about, making time for those things that do recharge the battery, and recognizing we're human and prioritizing those things. I think that's a hard thing for a lot of executives to make time for. I call it the fun. Maybe
Yeah.
it's taking a walk, or it's going to the coffee shop, or playing a sport or a musical instrument, or whatever it may be, but to take that time out. But seems like the more conversations I have on this show, I learned that is oftentimes a lot of the secret to where they're able to recharge. And I think you nailed it. I think the point about leading your team and bringing that energy with you as the tip of the spear is absolutely indispensable. And if you're always tapping and never recharging your own battery to be able to bring something to the group, then you're right. They feel it, they see it, and they're kind of waiting for that catalyst that never happens. And then things are always flat or they fall, which is catastrophic, obviously, particularly in a startup situation. So I think it's great advice. I appreciate you sharing that. That's a great reminder for me to hear everything you just said. So I'm like, oh, got to do that again. I got to do that again. I got a nice little laundry list out of that. So thank you.
Good.
That's really, really good. One of the things that, maybe kind of here as we wind it down, we've maybe got two more questions. One of them, they're similar, but they're different at the same time. So one of the kind of a pivotal moment in your career, I'm curious, was there a time in your career where something pivotal happened and it either helped, I would say change your trajectory or mindset, or it made you double down on, no, I'm doing what I should be doing. I just need to continue to stay in my lane and just kind of be who I am. I don't have to sort of redevelop or look in a different area to discover something new. Maybe I was off the track, and maybe it was something from a mentor. Maybe it was a project that you worked on. Anything kind of pivotal. I mean, I could look at my own life. I guess I'm thinking there was a couple of moments that were key that led me to where I am today. And I'm curious if there's anything that you wanted to share on that. And one of the things I'm thinking too is I love your background. I mean, you've done so many different things, and that's really kind of neat. You don't always see that. So I love the variety of the stuff that you've done. And I'm convinced it's the variety of the activities that allow you to sit in the seat that you're in today and doing the work that you're doing. And I'm curious if there was something that happened that, I don't know, that kind of brought it together for you, or, gave you a little supercharge.
Yeah. I guess, some different, as you asked that, some different moments kind of came through.
Sure.
One of them was being at a startup that went through an IPO, an initial public offering, right?
Yep.
And the excitement around that and all the work we had done to get to that point. And that for me kind of said, okay, riding these startup waves of new technology is worth it, right? So I think that that to me is kind of a very exciting thing. There were some pretty hard times too. So I'm big on, I call them tangible products, right? Building things that you could actually touch, not software. So,
Right.
and I've had some moment where we're working on, big products, like a wind turbine, and there were some pretty tough moments around launching that new wind turbine that are very memorable. I mean, I have positive moments of like climbing to the top of the wind turbine and how awesome that was, but then there were some other pretty serious things that maybe didn't go well. But again, it kind of, you learn a lot. You learn a lot from experts and specialists, but then also people who can kind of zoom out and say, how are we going to solve this problem? What's the risk to the business? What are we going to do? So there's some moments there. Let's see. Definitely some customer moments jump out, when you're working with a customer, and you kind of get to that point and you've solved that customer pain point for them, and they're excited about the new technology and you're excited, and they're like, wow, I can't believe this works. And you're kind of like, yes, I can't believe it works. But you're like, of course it was going to work.
Of course, never had a doubt,
So,
right?
I have some good memories around that as well. And I would say, bringing products to market, right? So bringing products to market for me is that's a big theme throughout all the stuff I've done, whether I've done it on the engineering side, ops side, other sides, right? It's all around customers and product commercialization.
Okay. I love your answer. To me, just has a lot of balance. There's those high moments of, because most startups never go anywhere. And so to be in a startup that actually, sees the light of day, gets IPO'd, I mean, that's a huge win. And I think to have those moments that you're in the crucible and it's hard and it's dark, and are we going to make it? And, I mean, you're solving problems every day and you get to the finish line. That's got to be unbelievably exhilarating and gives you the fuel for the future. But also too, I love your pragmatic and practical and realistic approach, quite frankly, about being in the trenches and you're working on things, on designs, and we thought it was going to work and it didn't work and it failed and we got to go back and we're under a tight deadline, and but then the thrill of victory when it does work and the customer's like, man, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and you're like, you get to share in that moment, right? That's one of the big reasons I love recruiting, is that when you bring somebody to a better opportunity and a better situation professionally, they invite you in. You get a front row seat to their life and to their family, and you get to celebrate that win for them. And to me, that's an incredible high. It's like, oh, this is amazing. It's wonderful. So No, I appreciate you sharing that. That's good. You've got a lot of balance there, which I think is important. Yeah, one of the questions to kind of wrap it all up that I like to ask is, what is the best piece of advice you ever received?
Best piece of advice I've ever received.
And it could be personal, it could be professional. Sometimes it's the personal antidote that you apply to your whole life that makes it work. And sometimes it's in a business setting and you're like, oh, that's great, because that's a principle I've used over the last 10 years that has really anchored me and gotten me to, honestly, where I am today in a lot of ways.
Yeah. What immediately comes to mind
Sure.
is someone, saying have fun. But I mean, that sounds so obvious. But if you enjoy what you're doing, like we were talking about before, right? People know and people want to be around you, and that's a really big part of bringing that in day in and day out. Let's see, another piece of advice. I'm sure there's others, kind of around getting more people in STEM. I mean, I would just say, yeah, I mean, get out of your comfort zone and try different things and get out there. And I guess I'm an engineer and I went to an engineering school, right? Western Polytech. But I mean, I do want more people to come in and enjoy STEM and like just get in there and solve problems. I mean, you need all approaches, but I would say continue to push yourself, have that learning mindset, and get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, I love that. Because honestly, like my grandfather used to say, you get no more out of life than you put into it. And I think that if you're willing to push yourself through some pain, you'll have some great moments. And if you don't do it, then we expect mediocrity. I just think that's kind of the way it's going to work, But I love what you said too about having fun. You're right. There's things in our job and in our career we have to do that are like, I got to go do that again, and would rather not. But I think at the end of the day, if you don't genuinely enjoy what you're doing, you're probably doing yourself a disservice, right? Go do something else. I mean, be true to yourself. If this is not it, and it's probably having, let's be honest, a negative impact on everybody around you too. It could be better for all parties involved. And anyway, so I like that about having fun. Any other final thoughts before we sign off? Any other thoughts? Anything you wanted to share or talk about before we wind it down? Kind of give you the last take.
Oh, thanks. Let's see. I feel like we covered a lot.
That's good.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, maybe everyone take one step for climate change, right? So if you learned something today, maybe do one thing. If not, go figure out, what are you going to do? Are you going to honestly, it could be, you're growing veggies in your own garden, you're, composting, you're biking places a little more often. I don't know. I mean, there's kind of a variety of things you can do personally, but maybe that's my one kind of takeaway challenge I hope to leave people with, is if everyone does one or two things, right, then I think we'll be going in a good direction.
It's awesome. I appreciate that. What's the best way to get you? People want to follow up with you after seeing the podcast. What would be the best way to get you?
Probably through LinkedIn is a good way.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, LinkedIn, and then Pamela Giasson, Giasson, Lynch, Lynch.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for making time to come on the show today. I've had a lot of fun with you. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I had a lot of fun too. This is great.
Thank you. Well, we're wrapping up another episode here today. If you're looking to be a guest on the show, look behind me. There it is, intergeniuspodcast.com. Check it out. And if you got the courage to come on and sit in the hot seat like Pamela did today, let us know. So much fun being with you, Pamela. Remember, there's a genius inside of all of us. It's up to you to discover it, harness it, and share it with the world. So the question always is, what's your inner genius?
This is the Padua Podcast Network. PaduaPodcastNetwork.com.